Okay, so we've got this sort of loop creating these nodes, and now what we want to do is actually put this into a group. Okay, so let's just zoom in here, and what I'm basically going to do is just delete all of these, okay, because we're going to recreate those again. But obviously what we want to do is not create all these nodes here, because that's a bit of a mess, but create them inside a neat group for us. Okay, so let's sort of go through this process. Okay, so now one of the things we want to do is, what we're going to do is basically select all our nodes. Okay, so as we create them, we're going to make sure that they're all selected. Okay, and then what we're going to do is say, right, make a group using all the selected nodes. All right, so in order to do that, one of the first things we need to do is actually make sure that there aren't any nodes selected in here. Okay, because otherwise they'll get included in the group. Okay, so if the user's already got some nodes selected in here, then what we want to do is we want to run a command just to deselect those first of all. So I'm going to go nuke, okay, scripts dot misc. Okay, now these nuke scripts, so what I should do is actually, this is a good point to actually kind of go into the documentation here. If I go file, help, documentation, okay, you'll see there's various bits of documentation in here, but one of them is the Python scripting reference. Okay, and what you'll find is basically you've got all your classes in here, everything you could possibly imagine. Okay, and typically what I do is I tend to just go Control F, you must have an equivalent on your Mac, Control F, and just search for things. So if I want to do a transform, I'm going, okay, let's go and see if I can find a transform node. Okay, that's not going very well for me at the moment. Okay, or if I want to kind of do something with selection, so I want to clear selection, so I'm going to go selection. Okay, so I know I want to do something with selection, and I just go and search for that, and you can see that we're going through all these. These are different modules. These are groups of classes. Okay, I tend to have sort of select all, everything available there, and then search, and then I can kind of go and have a look and see what's in here. So I've got invert selection. That's quite a useful command. Clear selection. That's for camera tracking. Miscellaneous.clear selection recursive. That looks good. Okay, and I can click on that and I can go okay, and it should give you some information on there. Sets all nodes to unselected, including child groups. Great, that's exactly what I want. Okay, so you can see how you can use this to kind of search for extra sort of functionality. Now, these nuke scripts.mis are basically kind of like miscellaneous functionality that's quite useful, i.e., quite often when you're doing stuff in nuke, these are things that these are bits of functionality which might be used by multiple nodes, so they're kind of miscellaneous. Okay, they're not specific to a node. They kind of could be used by multiple nodes at multiple different points, and we can access those sort of miscellaneous functions here. Okay, so it's useful kind of getting used to the documentation and looking through this and understanding where things are. Okay, right, I'm going to go back to my code. Okay, so this miscellaneous script, let's have a look. So basically it's going to be a nuke script.miscellaneous.clear underscore selection underscore recursive. Let's just move this out so you can see it a bit more clearly. Underscore recursive, and because this is a function, even though we're not actually passing any value to it, in order for the computer to understand that it's a function, we need to open and close brackets. So when you're dealing with a parameter or a variable, we don't open and close brackets. When we're doing a function a function, then we must open and close brackets regardless of whether we're passing a parameter to it. So for example, where we're doing the dot here function to create a dot, again, we're not passing any parameters to it, but I still need to open and close those brackets, okay, in order to tell the computer that it's a function, not a parameter. Okay, it's really good to think about it from the computer's point of view and how the computer's interpreting these commands when you're programming. Okay, because that gives you a clear idea of why these conventions exist and what they're for. When you understand something, then you tend to remember it and it kind of works a bit better. That's certainly the case for me. Okay, so that's what we've got in here. I'm hoping I haven't spelled that wrong. Okay, so that's going to unselect anything that's that the user may have selected here. Okay, then what we want to do is in fact, I'm thinking with the approach that we're going to take, we might not even need this. So I'm just going to hash this out for the moment and just check whether we need that. Okay. So actually, what we're going to do is I'm going to create a group. Okay. So I'm going to call it n group because it's a node. Okay. Again, I could call it whatever I want. This is just a variable. Okay. And I'm going to go nuke dot nodes dot group. Okay. So the approach I'm going to take, rather than I had this approach, what we're going to do is we're going to select everything and then add everything that's selected to a group. I'm going to take a slightly different approach. Okay, so I'm going to go, I'm going to create a group node. Okay, going nuke n group. Okay, and then what I'm going to do is run this command. I'm going to go n group dot begin. And what that means is everything subsequent to this is going to be done inside the group. Okay. And what we need to do is at the end of the process, what I need to do is go, so once we've done this for loop, outside of this for loop, I need to go, I need to go n group, okay, dot end. So that means that now any commands that we're running are now not ran inside this group, okay? So just to recap, I'm creating a node called group here, and then what I'm doing is this begin command means that every subsequent command should be ran in the context of this group, i.e. adding stuff, everything we're adding should be added to the group, not the main bit. And then after this end group command, at the end of this, okay, what this means is everything after this should be ran outside the context of that group. Okay, now let's run this and see what happens. Great, it's created a group for us, and I am just going to go and look inside that group. Let's have a look. Great, and it's put it all inside that group. That's marvelous. Okay, that's just what we need. Okay, now the only thing you'll find is that it hasn't actually got inputs and outputs for us to connect to. I can't connect to it. Okay, so we need to actually create an input and output to that. Okay, so I go back to that script editor. Everything I spoke to that is a bit of a waste of time, so we don't need that command. Let's get rid of that because we're using a different approach. Okay, but what we need to do is put like an input and output node in there. Let me just demonstrate that in the group. If I go back into the group for us, what we want to do is basically put in, if I go input, I want to put an input command here. And then what I want to do is put an output command here. And you'll notice that when I go back to my main node graph, now we've got inputs and outputs. Okay, so that's what I want to create. Now, obviously, I can go just to check what the class is called. It's called input. That's brilliant. That's kind of makes sense for us. Okay, so what I'm then going to do is go back to my script editor. Go back to my script editor. Okay, and then what I'm going to do is just above this dot command. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do after we've started the group is basically create this input command. Okay, so I'm going to go n input. Okay, equals nuke dot nodes dot input, open close brackets. Okay, so again, just using this class here to create an input node. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is create that, and then obviously I'm creating this dot class, and what I want to do is connect this dot class to this input. So I'm going to go n dot dot set input. Okay, set input, and it's going to be input 0 because we've only got one input into the dots. That's the whole point of a dot, I think. Well, I suppose we can have multiple ones if we want to. No, one input. Then I'm going to go and I'm going to go equals n input. So I'm going to connect that to the dot. Okay, wonderful. Next thing we want to do is we want to do the output. Okay, so just before we do the end group, I'm going to go n output dot equals nuke dot nodes dot output, and then I'm going to go and then I'm going to go n output dot set input, and then the input is going to be the last merge node that we created. So if I just scroll down here, you'll see that the input into this output here is the last merge node we created, which is called nmerge. Okay, so I'm just going to go 0 nmerge. Okay, so hopefully that will now, if I close that, let's close that, let's delete that group, and if we run this section of code here, we have had an error. So it's our first one that's come up. When you get an error, it will, and I can see straight away what it is, but it's highlighted the line, and it will try to give you an idea of what that error is. It is a computer, so it is very thick and not very able to tell you exactly what the error is, but it will say it's not working and try and give you some idea of it. Okay, so it's saying object has no attributes called modes. Okay, and if we have a look in here, yes, on this line, obviously I've called it modes, but it should be called nodes. Okay, so we can see what that error was. So typically it will highlight the line where the error occurred. So let's delete that. Now I'm hoping, yeah. Now what's happened there is there's a slight kind of issue that happens here, and you may experience this. What's happened is because it started the program, let me just open this up. Because it started the program, because it started the program and actually started creating the group and went begin in the context of the group, okay, and then it kind of stopped while it was in there, it's still in the context of the group. It's not actually able to kind of, you know, now I'm running this command, I'm kind of running it in the context of a group that doesn't exist. Okay, so this is clearly a problem for us, and what that means is because it's trying to every command I now run is being ran in the context of this group. Because of that, I'm basically getting errors. Okay, or it's not even running at all. You're not seeing any results. Look, I run it, nothing's happening because it's trying to run it in the context of a group that doesn't exist. Okay, now I'll try and find a way of resolving this. One of the ideas I had was if I just go run end group again, would that solve the problem? No, it doesn't. So what I end up doing is basically opening up something like Notepad. So I'm just going to go, hopefully I can just go open up a new Notepad. Yeah, I just end up running Notepad and storing scripts. I've kind of used Notepad to store scripts. Okay, so I'll just copy and paste this whole script, put it into Notepad. Okay, all right, so I've got it stored, and then basically what I have to do is close and open Nuke again. Okay, it seems to be the only way I've managed to solve this problem. If someone finds another way of doing this, then please let me know. But the error is caused by the fact that I ran the ngroup begin command, but didn't run the ngroup end command. Okay, because obviously the code had to stop because we had an error. So yeah. So anyway, let's just wait till Nuke starts again. And now what I'm going to do is go File. Let's just maximize that to our screen. That should be. Come on. Yes, perfect. Okay, I'm going to File. Open recent comp. So we're just going to open up the same feedback comp. I don't want to open up the one that it sort of auto saved. Here we are. So let's just delete this. So this is the feedback comp that we were working with originally. I don't want these. Let's just remove these bits here that we weren't using. I think those weren't in your version anyway. I think all I needed was. All I want is this merge node, and everything's set up. Great. Okay. Then what I can do is go back into our Notepad, grab that. In fact, often what happens is that Nuke kind of saves the script anyway. I'm hoping that Nuke hasn't crashed. Let's have a look what's happened here. No, we're good, we're good. Sorry. There's a bit of a pause in the proceedings there. Again, I'm going to open up my script panel. Windows. script editor. So if we look at this, let's have a look. Did it correct this? Yeah. So that whole nodes problem, where was it? It was in the input, wasn't it? Input dots. We called it modes. So that's all edited. That's all there. So actually, we don't need to copy and paste that script back in because it's actually it has saved that last version. I just don't like relying on that, hence copy and pasting it to Notepad. And often what I'll do is copy and paste things to Notepad and just save it in Notepad. Okay, and you'll see a copy of this script in a Notepad text file that you can then just open and put into any application. There will be an equivalent to Notepad in on the Mac as well. Don't use Word or a word processor. The reason being is that word processors so I'll just demonstrate this, try and demonstrate this. Word processors do different characters for opening and closing double quotes and single quotes. So if you go into, say, a word processor, let's just go and demonstrate this. I've just got Word. These are all little pitfalls to be aware of, okay? If I go like that, notice how this character is actually different to that character, and they are literally different ASCII characters. And in a compiler won't understand that because they're completely different characters. They're basically not inverted commas. They're something else. Again, same issue. Oh, actually, no, not so much of an issue with the single quotes. So single quotes doesn't cause you that problem. So please use a proper text editor, not a word processor, to store things in. Okay, great. Let's delete that. Let's run this command and hopefully it'll work. Here we go. And now we've got the group with the input and the output. Okay, so a little bit of a problem there, but this has enabled us to, for me to actually show you that problem and how to work around it. Again, if I connect this group into here, there we go. Okay, you will see that it's doing all that translate, and that's brilliant. Now what we want to do is we want to actually, if I go to this group at the moment, all we've got is the standard kind of controls, you know, that any node has, okay, in Nuke. What we want to do is actually add specific controls to be able to kind of control the parameters in the transforms and in all the transforms inside this group, okay? So let's do that, okay, right. Okay, so what we want to do is we want to what we want to do is create some knobs. Okay, they're called knobs in Nuke. Okay, and if you've done the Gizmo tutorial, and I advise you to do that before this, because it will give you some, this will make more sense, okay? But if you've done the Gizmo tutorial, this idea of creating knobs to control things inside your group, i.e. what we're trying to do is expose certain bits of parameters of stuff inside the group so that we can control it at a group level rather than having to go inside the group. And we call those knobs. So to create knobs, what we're going to do is got this group begin, and then before I create all my nodes, I'm going to put the code here, okay? And keep in mind, hopefully you're picking up, it's very important where you do things. That is quite an important thing, okay, to be aware of. Okay, so for example, these knobs are going to, basically, I'm going to create these knobs, and then I'm going to create expressions inside of the transform node that links to those knobs. So I have to create the knobs first, okay? So first thing I'm going to do is create the I'm going to create a knob to displace it in the x-axis, okay? Now what I'm doing is I'm creating a knob, so I'm going to call it K for knob, okay, all right? And I'm going to go K, X. So this is our, and I'll call it X underscore trans. So that's our translation in the x-axis, okay? And then I'm going to go nuke dot double, okay, underscore knob, okay, equals, and I'll just call it x underscore. So what we're doing here is we're defining the name for it, okay, x underscore disp. So that's the name of the parameter, okay, and that's what we're going to use to drive our translate values in here, okay. But obviously we want to give it a sort of a user-friendly name, okay. So I'll call it translate in X. Okay. Notice it's pink at the moment. Obviously, when I close it, it suddenly understands that this is all in quotes and there's no conflict with keywords at that point. And I'm going to give it just a colon at the end of it just to keep it neat, and then close the brackets. Okay, so I've created this variable here called kxtrans. K means it's a knob, and I've called it xtrans. And basically, I'm going to call this. Sorry, I want to call it xtrans. That's what I want to call it here. I'm going to go nuke double knob. Okay, and double knob, sorry, is basically what this is a knob that is going to create a. It's going to create a double. A double is basically a float. Okay, is another word for a float. And what that means is it allows us to. It's going to create a slider which will allow the a slider which will allow the person to actually put in a floating point number, i.e. a number with decimal places. Okay. At this point, it's kind of useful to go back to this documentation, because if you go to knob, you'll see there's all sorts of knobs that you can use. Loads of them here. Color chip knobs, disabled knobs, format knobs. There's loads of different types of knobs you can use to kind of give your group the various controls it needs, as you whatever sort of control you need. So you can go through these and try all these different knobs out if you want to, and maybe you might find a better sort of set of knobs than the ones I've created for this tutorial. Okay. Next thing we want to do is I need to set the range. I want to set the minimum and maximum range for that knob. So let's go into, again, I'm just going to go into the documentation, just show you how to use that. There should be one called double knob. Here it is. If I double click on that, you'll see that there's various, it's talking you through. So the functions that I'm talking about are called methods. So those are functions, and there's various methods in here that you can use, okay? One that we're interested in is set range. So one of the things I initially did was I wanted to set the maximum and minimum, but if I click on that, you'll see that the maximum and minimum are actually, they just return values. They're not actually for setting a value, they just return a value, okay? If I scroll back up here, this was just jumping to this is the description of the knob here. Oh, array knob. Let's just start again. Hang on. Go back here. Click on double knob again. And you can see, so if I look at this set range, okay, this set range command allows me to put in a command here. And it's saying the way to use it is go set range, identify the actual knob that you want to set the range for, and then go and then put the values in and out. I'm actually using a slightly different convention, so you can use it in a slightly different way to this. Then you set the minimum and the maximum, okay? But you can see how I'm using this documentation to inform and understand what I can do with these different types of objects within Nuke, okay? Great. Right, so the way I'm using it, so is I'm going to go kx underscore trans, so it's this knob here, okay, equals dot set range, and then I'm going to put in the minimum and maximum. So I'm going to go minus 50 to 50. So the user can input between minus 50 and 50. So notice how I'm actually using this in a slightly different way to how it does it in the documentation. You can do it in that documentation the way it does in that documentation if you want to, if you feel more comfortable with that. But notice if I can just try and put these side by side. Where was it? Just got to find it all again. It was set range, and you'll see. Can you see? So rather than doing set range, I haven't done self. I've gone self. The self bit, I've basically gone self dot set range, and then the minimum and maximum. Okay. And F. Sorry, the other thing as well is that F stands for float, so it means it's expecting an integer value. Okay. So for example here, it's expecting a B and a view, which at the moment I don't know what view is, but I'm going to assume, so B is a Boolean, I'm going to assume that view is perhaps a viewer node, possibly. I don't know. Okay. Okay. Next thing. So yeah, if I wanted to do it the way it's set up, I could go set range. So the way the manual wanted me to do it was to go set range. Then I go kx trans. Then I'd go minus 50, and then I'd go 50. Okay, let's just again put that next to it, so you can see how this sort of more closely follows that structure. So both this line and this line do exactly the same thing. They're just laid out in a different way. I like this way of doing it because it makes more sense to me that I'm running this command on this knob. Okay, and I like that. Okay, so that's how I do it. Okay, great. Next thing I want to do is I want to give it a default value. Okay, so we started with 20, so let's do that. Kx underscore trans dot set value. Okay, so I'm going to set the value of this to 20, and I'm going to put a dot in here, and I'm actually going to put a dot on these 50s as well. I'm not sure if I need to do that, but it just means that by putting a dot in there, it means I'm telling the computer quite explicitly that this is a floating point number. Okay, and sometimes if you don't put a dot somewhere, especially in things like divisions and things like that, it makes them behave differently. Okay, depending on whether you've put a float in there or an integer there. So it's quite useful just to be explicit to the computer. It is a dot. Okay. Then what I'm going to do is I need to add this. Now I've created this knob, I need to add the knob to the group. So I'm going to go ngroup dot add knob. Okay, and then it's going to be this kx trans that we're going to add to it. Okay, great. So that's our commands. Let's run this again. Oh, I've made an error here. What did I do? Underscore trans. Okay, right. Now, because of that error, I'm going to have to do the whole restart thing again. I won't put you through the pain of doing that, so I will literally just pause for the moment. Okay, so I've set it all back up again, and it was this error here. I didn't call it the same thing, so you've got to call your variable names the same thing, otherwise that will cause a problem with the computer. The computer is, again, the computer's thick. It's got no understanding. It's not going to correct any errors for you. You need to actually make it exactly right, okay? So, and make sure you highlight the entire script when you run it as well, okay? So I'm going to run this, and there we are. We've created this group, but now when I double click on this group, notice I've got a knob there. So rather than just this set of bits and pieces here, I've actually got a knob here that I can actually call translate in X. Okay, I might just go translate X actually, that I can use between minus 50 and plus 50. Brilliant. So there's my knob there. Okay, let's go back to our script, and what we want to do is create a set of other knobs as well. So all I'm going to do is just go back to this. I don't think I want to call it translate in X. I think I'll just go like that. That's fine. And I'm just going to create a whole set of other knobs here. In fact, all I need to do really is just kind of duplicate this bit of code here. So I'm going to do one for Y. So I'll call that ky, ky trans, and obviously I need to make sure I alter that, ky trans. Okay, I'm going to set it exactly the same values. Okay, that's fine. And obviously this is going to be called Y trans, and I'll call it translate Y. Brilliant. Okay, then what I want to do is do one for the rotation. Okay, so I'm going to go, again, I'm going to call this KY, and I'll call it ROT for rotation. Again, I'm just going to literally change all of these for that there, okay? And then obviously rename that. I'll just call it ROT, and I'll call this rotate. And then finally, I'm going to create one for the scale, so we can actually scale our object as well. Okay, so these are great. Do that again, and I'm going to call it KI scale. Again, just rename this. Okay, there we go. Again, I just want to go there, scale. Obviously my rotation, I want to kind of set up a different range actually for my rotation. So just go back to my rotation for a moment. I want to set the range to minus 20, plus 20. You can change these later if you feel that you sort of disagree with what I'm setting up here. And then I want the default value to be 0, so there's no rotation applied to it to start with, okay? Again, with the scale, so I've got scale here, I've changed that. Obviously, I need to call it, sorry, kx underscore scale. Make sure that's correct there. And then what I want to do is go, I'm going to call this scale, and I will call this scale. Great. Okay, so I've done that. Next thing I want to do is go, next thing I want to do is just, again, my default values here. Don't need such large values, so I'm actually going to scale it from -1 to plus 2, okay, or 2. -1 basically is obviously going negative, so I'm actually going into minus figures, not just scaling it down but actually making it kind of invert itself almost. What's interesting about the -1 is it sort of oscillates, so that's quite an interesting effect in terms of size, so that's something to look at as well as a thing to try. And then this is obviously minus, and then this one's going -2. So this is going +2 to make it larger. Okay, so yeah, you get some interesting effects with that. Right. Okay. Next thing, I'm going to go and I'm going to set the default value to 1, because obviously the default scale, i.e. scaling it to the original size, would be 1. Okay. Great, so that's all set up. So if I now run all this, again I've got to select all the code, make sure I select all the code, okay, I'm just going to delete that group there. Let's run that. So we've got another group, and if I click on there, I've got all these knobs. Now, these knobs aren't doing anything, so if I connect this up here, and can I look at it through my viewer? Brilliant. If I connect this up here, the knobs aren't doing anything, okay, at the moment. So what we need to do is now tell the translate nodes in here to actually use these knobs, to use the values in these knobs, okay? So let's do that. Okay, so right, back into our script. So really what we want to do is do some work on this translate node here, okay? So what I'm thinking is we're going to do quite a lot of commands in here. So what I'm thinking is I want to actually just tab this in to here. So this one line that we're doing here, this is one line of code, this is one command, but we can actually make this command span multiple lines, okay? In order just to make it more readable in terms of what we're doing. So first of all, we want to make the translate Y actually follow the knob. So the knob's at the group level. So in order to go through this, from this node to the group level, we need to go parent. And then I want to go parent dot, okay, and what did we call it? We called it x underscore trans. So x underscore trans, okay. And then I go for the Y, I go space parent dot Y underscore trans, okay. So you can see that we've set up the translate here, okay. Great. Now what I want to do is do the same for the rotation. So I'm going to get, again, make sure I've got my little comma at the end here for the next value. So I'm going to go rotation. Now just, it's worth just going, again, pressing I here just to check what the values are. So actually it's rotate and scale, so we know what we're doing here. Okay, rotate. So notice how I'm using this to know what values I want to edit in here. So rotate equals, again, parent dot, and I think I just called it rot in here, didn't I? Rot, there we go, dot rot. And then finally, I'm going to go scale equals, and I think this is just scale, there we go, scale, sorry, parent dot, and I called this scale, didn't I? Scale. Okay, sorry, I should put these into quotes, otherwise we will have a problem. In fact, let me just yes, okay. So effectively what we're doing in here is we're actually, rather than giving these values, we're actually giving these expressions, okay. So you can see that how this, so we're actually linking, giving expressions which link this these values to the that link these values to the knobs that we've just created. So I'm going to close that. Again, I'm going to just move this so we can see things a bit more clearly. And I'm going to select the whole code. Hopefully I haven't made an error. Run. Fabulous. Okay, so this is our group. And now when I'm going to again just connect this up. So everything looks the same. But now what you should find is I can now actually edit this using the knobs, because the translate is all linked to these knobs here. You can see here's my rotation. Okay, the rotation is a little bit peculiar because the rotation actually rotates around. If I take this transform here, so I can zoom this out and see this transform. If I rotate, it actually rotates. It kind of changes how the rotation works. So yeah, so the rotation kind of behaves a bit oddly on this, not quite as you would expect. One of the things is what's happening is it's basically rotating around this point here, which isn't very useful. So what I would suggest is that you want to actually center the translate into the middle of this screen here. So yeah, let's just quickly go to the script editor and edit that. Okay, so again, I'm going to add another thing that we want to edit in here in our translate here. So I'm going to center, and it's the American spelling of center. Tends to be the convention with programming language. Even though the Foundry is a British company that's made this software, they're obviously going with the American convention, in the same way that Tim Berners-Lee, despite being British, went with center when he created this spelling of center when he created HTML. So that's center, American spelling. And again, I'm just going to put in, what I'm doing is, assuming we're working in HD, I'm just going to go and put in like the center of a HD image, which would be 960 by 550. So it'd be 960 in the x-axis, so that's 1080. That's 1920 divided by 2. Hopefully I've got my maths right there. And then the 1080p, the 1080 divided by 2 would be 540. Okay. Now hopefully by doing this, I'm going to run this command again. So let's delete that. Run this command again. Create another group. Again, connect this up. Ooh. Here we go. And again, click on this group, and you should see that the rotation kind of acts a little bit more like we would expect. And it's basically, again, if I just do this translate and move this, it's rotating around this sort of center area. So it's giving us a bit more of a useful rotation than we had previously. And obviously I can also scale my objects as well, scale them down, and do all kinds of interesting things and effects that I might want to do. Again, I can use this whole group can be applied to, it can be applied to, it can be applied to video as well as images. I'm just doing it with an image here to make things sort of less confusing. I just chose a Rubik's Cube because it's colourful. But you could apply it to video as well. And indeed, what you can do is even animate these. So you can even animate these and have this sort of rotation and translation and stuff changing over time to create some really quite interesting effects. Okay. So next thing I'm going to do is, what we want to do is, at the moment, we are sort of burnt in with, if you remember rightly, with 10 repeats. We can only repeat 10 objects. What I want to do is, it would be lovely to put a slider that actually allows us to change the number of repeats dynamically, you know, or in real time like we've done before. And that is possible, but you'd have to create quite a complex lump of code to do that, because you're having to actually delete and insert nodes on the fly, and you'd have to use sort of more sort of functionality in a class-based approach. So really, I don't want to go into that complexity in this tutorial. So the best solution for the moment is literally to prompt the user and ask them how many loops they want to put in. And the way to do that is right at the start of this code, we're going to go str repeats. Okay, so this is going to be a string of repeats, and the reason it's going to be a string is because we're going to actually ask the user to input some text, and then we need to convert that text to a number. Okay, so then what I'm going to go do is go nuke dot input, or sorry, get input, and I'll go enter number of loops or copies. Let's do copies because that makes more sense to the user. Okay. And then I will go like that. And then I will put in, and then we put in a default value. So we put in a starting value, and I'm going to put a starting value of 10 in there. Okay, great. Then what we need to do is we need to, with the repeats, what we need to do is we need to change this repeats now. Let's just put this down here. We need to change this repeats now so it's actually using the string, the loop string. Okay, so sorry, we want to change this repeat so it's actually using the number that the user's entered here. Okay, so that's going to be, so that whatever the user enters here will be stored as text in this variable. So what we need to do is convert that to a number. So it's similar to string. We just go int. This converts anything we want, or anything we can logically convert into a number. Okay, so in this case, and a string is just a series of characters, if you're wondering what I mean by a string. So we're going to take this string, and that's the str repeats string, and basically convert that into a number and store that in here, and then that will drive the rest of the application. Okay, so that should be the end of our tutorial and the end of what we've done. So let's run this now. Okay, so I'm just going to delete this group. Let's run this. So it's ask us how many loops we want. Let's put in a good number. I'm going to put in, let's say 50. Yay. Okay, and it's created this group for us with 50 copies. I can then connect that up into here. And that gives us 50 copies of this thing. And we can kind of move that here and we can see all those copies. And then I can just go into the knobs here and I can kind of edit how that looks. So I can go translate there. I can scale it. Okay, make them bigger. Ooh, very big. So you can kind of get all kinds of interesting effects. Start rotating that. See what happens here. Okay, etc., etc., and start manipulating that. Okay, so that is really kind of an introduction to using Python in Nuke. It hasn't covered everything, but I think it's covered all the main sort of elements that you would be interested in, and it's giving you enough to really kind of get started and doing something interesting in Python.